Hey everyone, we're going to be breaking down the Apalachee High School shooting that just occurred. We're going to give it to you from a law enforcement perspective and share with you how threats towards schools are investigated by local law enforcement agencies. This is the Shots Fired podcast. I'm Kyle Schoberg, and to my right, we have Mark Redledge.
What we know right now is 2 teachers and 2 students have been killed. 1 teacher and 8 additional students have been injured. The suspect is 14 years old, and he's already been arrested when he surrendered to law enforcement. He's facing right now 4 counts of murder. Each of those counts in the state of Georgia holds a life sentence without the opportunity of parole. He is not eligible for the death penalty in the state of Georgia because he's under the age of 18 when he was arrested, but he is being tried as an adult. In addition to this, his father, who's 54 years old, has just been arrested, and he is being charged with 4 counts of involuntary murder, 2 counts of secondary degree murder, 8 counts of cruelty to children, and he could face up to 180 years in prison for this. That's what we know right now. Things are still changing. More information is coming in, and the district attorney is already saying additional charges could still be brought once the preliminary hearing has completed. Okay, let's talk about the timeline and what we know right now and what's been released to the media. So July 2022, the family was evicted from their home for failing to pay rent. Part of that eviction process, deputies actually made entry into their home and seized 3 firearms. Those firearms were later returned to the family. December 2022, Marcy and Colin, the mom and dad of the suspect, they actually separated. And Marcy wrote on her LinkedIn that she had left her husband saying, finally separated from my abusive husband from almost 14 years. Let's fast forward a little bit to May 2023, and this is where it gets interesting. The FBI received several anonymous tips about a school shooting happening, but it was an unidentified location and time when this was actually going to occur. Now, the FBI says the threats also included photos of guns. Those tips that came in included the suspect's email address, his IP address, which was actually traced back to the house that they were actually evicted from. The FBI went out to the house and ended up contacting the 14-year-old and the father. During that investigation, the suspect at this time was 13 years old, and the father said the guns were in the house. He actually owned the guns, but his son did not have access and they were locked up. Then the suspect, who's 13 years old at this time, he denied making any of those threats online and said he actually stopped using Discord, which is a texting form chat room. He said he discontinued his account because so many people kept hacking into it, which is kind of interesting that he actually says that. Local schools were actually notified about this, and there was no probable cause based on the FBI's investigation for an arrest or to take any additional law enforcement action towards this family, which we will actually get into in here just a few minutes of how school threats really get investigated. All right, a couple more interesting dates. December 2023, the father actually purchased an AR rifle for his son. Okay, so the day of the shooting, which is September 4th, 2024, what we know right now is at 9:45, the suspect actually left his classroom, retrieved a rifle, and then came back at some point and tried to get back into his same room, but the door was locked, so he ended up going next door and making entry into that room. Law enforcement, the Barrow County Sheriff's Department, was actually notified at about 10:20 a.m. A few minutes later, 2 school resource officers arrived on scene, and one of those SROs actually made contact with the suspect, and the suspect immediately surrendered, and he was arrested. On September 5th, the father was arrested, and on September 6th, the father and the son were both arraigned in court. Right now, everybody in the media is talking about how the FBI was aware of this person. The FBI had actually gone out to their house, interviewed the father, interviewed the son, verified that there was guns, had threats that had photos of guns in it, but no arrest or no action was made back then. Fast forward a year, a school shooting takes place with the same person. So we're going to share with you from a law enforcement's perspective why sometimes arrests are made and sometimes they are not made, and when a school gets threats against them, how that's actually investigated.
Yeah, so when law enforcement receives one of these threats, I mean, every single one of these things gets vetted out and investigated to the fullest extent. I mean, when you get a school threat, whether it's in the middle of the day, at nighttime, it doesn't matter. It is going to get investigated, and it's going to be priority. Everyone up the chain is going to get notified, up to the chief of police, the sheriff, you name it. Schools get notified. It's a big deal. And so what I think people want to know is, why do sometimes these kids get arrested and sometimes they don't? The general rule of thumb is if you identify a particular kid who made a threat and you go out to their house, talk to their parents, figure out if they have, weapons, look at their phone and see, did they make the post? And especially if they admit to it, you should be making an arrest on that. I mean, the law is there for a reason. You still need to deal with the problem, and you can't just let these school threats just go unattended anymore. I mean, if you can articulate and you have the probable cause to make an arrest of a kid making a school threat, the arrest needs to get made. Whether they meant it or not, you're setting the precedence. And now, in this case, the father got arrested. So now we're talking about parents being arrested for some of these school shootings, which that is what we have to do now to start setting the precedence that if you know that your kid has some type of mental health issues, he had made a school threat, the FBI was at your house a year before, and then you go out and buy him an assault rifle, you are just as guilty and should be held liable for that. And I guarantee you after this, more and more parents are going to start taking note to that. All right, so I want to touch on what happens now when you notify the school, because every single time we get one of these threats, you have to notify the school. Now, the schools have huge decisions to make in this because they're getting paid based on the number of kids that come to school. Now, I'm not saying money is obviously more important than some kid's life, but when you have all of these tips that come in throughout the school year, which there's a ton of them, okay? They have to make that decision. Are they going to shut the school down? Do they cancel school? Do they do a school lockdown? I mean, there's a lot of decisions that the schools has to make. Now, I don't work for the school. I've been a part of a number of these school threat incidents. It is a big decision for them to have to make. And when they make that decision, let's say it's a school lockdown, everybody's going to get notified of that. Parents get notified. Kids start texting their parents. It starts to put everybody in that panic mode, right? So the schools do have like really big choices to have to make. Now, I think because these things are happening more often, I think they're weighing more on the side of caution, and they'll worry about that on the back end. They can explain it. Let's talk about some of the technology though, because there was a piece of technology that was installed at this high school where the shooting occurred just a couple weeks prior to the actual shooting.
1 week prior, literally 1 week prior, they installed it.
So when we talk about school shootings or mass shootings, it's always going to be a reactive situation for law enforcement. We are always going to be behind the eight ball on this. Medical personnel, fire, cops, you name it. We are always going to be behind the eight ball. So when we talk about how can we be more proactive to either slow these things down or try to prevent them, these guys actually installed a device where all school teachers have to wear a lanyard with their photo ID on it, and on the back of the card or their photo ID is a button. And if they hit it 4 times, it alerts all of the other school teachers in the building that there's an incident and they need to lock their doors, shut their windows, and go into a lockdown mode. Now, this happened in this scenario where they were able to hit the button. If they hit it 8 times, it notifies law enforcement, and it actually sends a GPS signal to law enforcement exactly where the person was that was hitting the button. I want to mention that real quick because even if this is a small rural town and maybe it's going to take deputies not that long of a time to get there, minutes are going to be a lot of lives lost when you're talking about somebody going around shooting people with a firearm. In this case, because the teacher hit the panic alarm, all the other teachers were notified about it, and they did exactly what they were supposed to do, and they all locked their doors, which prevented the suspect from getting into other classrooms. That is taking a more proactive approach to this, to slow these things down, to buy law enforcement time to get there and deal with the situation. I think had that not got done, more lives would have been lost, and this would have been a much bigger issue. So the technology piece of it, I really like, because we can't just rely on the reactive side of it. I think we need to start doing more of a proactive approach to these school shootings or mass shootings.
I want to touch a little bit on school resource officers, or SROs, and their responsibilities. Depending on where you're at in the cities and rural areas, school resource officers generally have more than one school they're responsible for, meaning they may be responsible for 3 schools. So they're going from location to location. So they can't be on site at every location. There are cities and different schools that have SROs assigned to that campus specifically, but that's few and far between. Many of them have multiple responsibilities. So in this case, it sounds like those SROs were not on campus and they had to respond there. So school resource officers have multiple responsibilities. Most of them are assigned multiple schools. Unfortunately, I think this year, this is the 45th school shooting. This is a tragic incident. It's horrible. We hate reporting on this. Our hearts and prayers go out to the family members, the first responders, the kids at school, anybody that's been involved in this or that's been affected by this. This is tragic. More information we know is going to be coming out on this. More questions are going to be asked. More information is going to be demanded by the FBI. People are going to want to know why this kid wasn't arrested or what the process is for the FBI. A lot of information still coming out. Even the district attorney was saying more charges are going to be brought in the future. This is just evolving. This is a terrible incident. Our hearts go out to everyone that was involved.
That's all we have for you guys on this. Thank you for tuning in and watching. We appreciate you. Stay safe, be smart, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.